Okay.
So, Pastor Dan has asked me to share with you this morning some thoughts about Jesus and his work, that is, what he did on the cross. Now, as Episcopalians, one of the benefits of being an Episcopalian is that you're not locked into the Western default evangelical model of the death of Jesus. Do you know what I mean by that?
No.
The evangelical default model, that is the model of understanding the death of Jesus, is the one that says, we are sinners, and Christ died to redeem us to God. And the way he does this is he becomes incarnate, fulfills the law perfectly, becomes an innocent sacrifice on our behalf, takes the wrath of God and our sins upon himself, and appeases the angry God so that when we say, oh, I believe in that, then God can accept us. That's the default position. But it is not the position of historic Christianity. For the first 1,000 years of church history, if you were to go back and read from Ignatius of Antioch in 117, clear up through basically the year 1100, the dominant view of the death of Jesus had nothing to do with the wrath of God. It had everything to do with what is known as Christ the victor. And the technical term that's used for this in Latin is Christus victor. In this way of thinking in the early church, the major text that's used is going to be from the epistle to the Colossians, where, oh, now my thing is, there we go, where the Apostle Paul writes. Now, and it's important here, listen to the language of the text. And I have to say this, as how do I want to say this? As there's a tendency when we read the Bible just to hear blah, 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 right? What I'm asking you to do is listen to the language. The language is important. When you were dead in sin and the uncircumcision of your flesh, when you were dead, God made you alive together with Christ. When you were dead, do dead people have a will or choice? No. When you're dead, you're dead. Right? You all seen somebody that's dead. When you were dead, Paul says, God made you alive. First, and this is really key, it is God who initiates and completes our salvation. It's not up to us. God has already done this. We are the redeemed people. We are those who are reconciled. We do belong. How did God do this? When you were dead in trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made you alive together with Christ. Where is that occurring? Easter Sunday morning. Good Friday, all died with Christ. Easter Sunday morning, all are raised in Christ. Not on Good Friday, the elect died with Christ, and the elect are raised. That's Calvinism. And if you're part of the chosen frozen, why, you get to go to heaven. No. Paul's argument, not only in a text like this, which is more implicit, but in a text like Romans 5:12-21, Paul makes it very clear that all died in Christ, and all are made alive in the resurrection. God made you alive together with Christ when he forgave us all our trespasses. All doesn't mean many. And all doesn't mean some. All means all. There is not a single sin that will be accounted to any human being in the hereafter. How did God do this? He erased the record that stood against us with its legal demands. That is, all the prohibitions, all the commandments, all the things that we don't do, all the things that we should do that we don't do, all the things that we do that we shouldn't do. That whole ledger is erased. There is nothing you can do to separate you from Papa, from God. Nothing. You belong because God has included you in the death and the resurrection of Jesus. He goes on to say, God set this aside. There's no divine accounting. God is not a bookkeeper. There is no, when I die and go through the pearly gates, I'm going to stand before a judge that's going to open the books and look at Michael Hardin's life and go, well, buddy, you did 3,943 bad things in your life, but you only did 1,323 good things. Go to hell. That doesn't happen that way. That's mythological. That's fantasy. It's also evangelicalism. And it's the way the church has preached the gospel in order to control the people. If in a pulpit I can stand up Sunday by Sunday and point my finger at you and say, oh, you did this today, Lorraine, and Betty, you did that, and I know about you, Dick, and on and on. You know, if I can do that as a priest or a pastor, I'm functioning as the Satan, the accuser of the brethren. And the evangelical tradition is loaded with this. It's a sick, dysfunctional, unhealthy tradition, and the Episcopal Church does not need it. So the first thing I want to urge you to do, in the light of a text like Colossians chapter 2, is throw that out. You're Episcopalian, you're not Baptists, right?
Amen.
How does God do this? Paul continues. He sets this aside, nailing it to the cross. Not only does the law, that is, prohibitions and commandments, do something to Jesus, the law accuses Jesus of being a blasphemer. When Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin gather together and they query Jesus, it is the law they use to justify their execution. Jesus is rightly condemned according to the law. The high priest and the Sanhedrin did the right thing according to the law. Do you hear this? This is very important. From the perspective of the human community on Good Friday, justice was served against a blasphemer and a troublemaker. Because the law said, this is how you handle blasphemers and troublemakers. You kill them. From a human perspective, justice was served. In other words, the trial of Jesus was absolutely legal. Now, just to kind of push this a little further, Richard Rubinstein wrote a book many, many years ago, decades ago, on the Holocaust, or the Shoah. And in this book, he argues, he's a Jewish scholar, but he argues that the Holocaust, or the Shoah, was an absolutely legal phenomenon, because the first thing the Nazi regime did was to strip the Jews of their civil rights. And the second thing they did 6 months later was to strip the Jews of their human rights. Now, are you allowed to kill animals? Think 80, 90 years ago. Yes, you are. And if you can strip human rights away from a group of people and you can call them non-human, can you kill them? Yes, you can, with impunity. The Holocaust was legal in that sense. That is, they first stripped him of civil rights, stripped him of human rights. Now what do you have left? Lumps of flesh that you can burn in ovens. In the same way, the death of Jesus was absolutely by the book legal. Now, if you think that this stuff happened 2,000 years ago only, or 80, 90 years ago, however long it's been since World War II, 75, 80 years, I just need you to think in terms of all the men, most primarily men, on death row in this country. And how many of these men that we have executed in our history as a nation that have been innocent. One of the most powerful things is the discovery of DNA and the use of DNA to prove the innocence of any number of these men on death row that were shanghaied by local sheriffs and prosecutors looking to better their records. I, for one, am fairly convinced that our prisons, which now are privately run, and so they are for profit, and they have a vested interest in making sure that people think that everybody locked up is guilty. These private institutions that run our prison system are in fact incarcerating and killing innocent people. Christ is dying all the time in America. But Paul says all of our trespasses get set aside and nailed to the cross, that the law gets nailed to the cross. Right and wrong gets nailed to the cross. Morality gets nailed to the cross. When Christ dies, the law dies. There is no more law. Does Paul not say in Romans chapter 10, Christ is the end of the law? Can you imagine a world in which there is no law? Is not the first thing you think of is anarchy if there's no law? Of course, because our capacity to think of a world without laws is very, very limited, because we don't yet get, as a Christian church, the importance and the value of love. Because where there is love, there is no law. Did I make that up, or am I quoting the Apostle Paul? What do you think? That's quoting the Apostle Paul. Where there is love, there is no law. There's no need for it. That's exactly right. Now here is how Jesus conquers the principalities and powers, and how the early church understood the death of Jesus. Paul goes on to say in Colossians 2:13-15, he disarmed the rulers and authorities and made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in it. So, when we look at the death of Jesus, do we see a victor or a victory? Or do we see a loser? How do we see this figure hanging on a cross? Is he losing or is he winning? And if he's losing, what has he lost? And if he's winning, what has Christ won? Paul says Christ did not lose on the cross. From a human perspective, when you look at Calvary, from a human perspective, you see a human being unjustly accused, lynch mobbed, hung on a Roman cross, who dies. And that's it. So, from a human perspective, Jesus loses. But from a divine perspective, Jesus does not lose, because Jesus shows that the power of the violence of the state, the power of the violence of the mob, the power of the violence of religion and religious authorities dies with him, because God will raise him from the grave. In the resurrection, Christ becomes the vindicated victim. God says, you declared Jesus guilty. I declare him innocent. The grave therefore cannot hold him, and he will be enthroned on high. This is all in your liturgy. We sang this and read it this morning. All of this material I'm saying here and now. It's all there. In other words, the Christ the victor theory, that Jesus triumphs over law, over governments, and over religion, is precisely the reason he dies. And with him dies government. With him dies law. With him dies religion. And when he's raised from the dead, the law is not raised with him. When he's raised from the dead, government is not raised with him. When he's raised from the dead, religion is not raised with him. Those remain dead. And that's the view of the early church for 1,000 years. But here's the problem. The early church had to figure this out. And so what they did was they talked about the devil and how the devil had managed to connive humanity in the Garden of Eden. And so God had to give humanity over to the devil, and we belong to the devil. And then Jesus came as a ransom, and he kind of faked the devil out. You know, the cross was the hook and Christ was the bait. The devil swallowed all that. And next thing you know, the devil is conquered. And but as you move into the Middle Ages, this gets played out in some rather strange ways. So it is that in 1098, a Catholic bishop, actually the Archbishop of Canterbury, this is long before they converted and became good Episcopalians, right, or Anglicans, Anselm of Canterbury, he writes a book. Cur Deus Homo. This is a book that Anselm writes to combat the craziness of what he perceived to be bad atonement thinking for 1,000 years. And it means, why did God become a human being? And his answer is this. Now, remember, Anselm, in the late 11th century, lives in a feudal culture. Serfs and lords, remember that from your high school history class? Okay? And if you dishonored anyone in the social ladder above you, you took honor away from them, you had to repay it. So if you dishonored the Lord, you might get 20 lashes with a whip. You dishonored the king, he might say, off with your head. You cannot take honor from someone in a feudal culture. Honor is a commodity, and there's only so much to go around. And the higher up the ladder you go, the more honor you have. And if someone takes your honor and you're at the top, and you don't do anything about it, you're going to start being perceived as lesser than on the scale. And so you will need some kind of requite for your honor. And you'll demand repayment. It's eye for eye, tooth for tooth kind of logic. It's that what's known as lex talionis kind of logic. Anselm is in this world. And so the way he formulates the death of Jesus is to say, oh, when humanity sinned in Adam, the universe went out of balance. God had to restore balance or justice to the universe. And he does that by sending Christ in the flesh and dying as a substitute on our behalf. This is the first time in the history of atonement you're going to get the category of substitution. That's the category we're used to. We're used to thinking, oh, Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left its crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. Jesus did it for me back then, back then, back then. Our problem here is not going to be so much the issue of substitution as we'll see, but what happens with that next. I'll come back to 1140 in a moment, but I need to first talk about John Calvin. How many of you know the name of John Calvin? How many of you are Calvinists? Of course not. You're Episcopalians. Good on you. John Calvin, in Geneva, in the 16th century, is trained as a lawyer. When you're trained as a lawyer, you're interested in law. Now, Calvin, following Anselm, but not the early church, does not see that the law is nailed to the cross of Christ. Calvin does not see that the law dies with Christ, that there is no more law. What Calvin will do is Calvin will read the Bible in such a manner as to say, not only when Adam sinned did the universe go out of balance, but Calvin will also say God got mad. In other words, for Calvin, God has an anger management problems and probably needs to go on medication. That's Calvin. And there are some moves that Calvin makes with regard to the Epistle to the Hebrews and the Epistle to the Romans. We won't get into the detail, it would just bore you to tears. But what Calvin does is he brings in this element of punishment. That is, sinners need to be punished. When they break the law, it's important that they experience pain. And so Calvin is the one that comes up with what's known as the penal substitutionary atonement theory. That is, there's punishment involved in the death of Jesus. God punishes Jesus on the cross. God gets angry at Jesus on the cross. God pours out his wrath against Jesus on the cross. And when God is completely satisfied that he's done the right thing, then he can sit back and go, okay, now anybody that I've elected, they're included in the cross. That's Calvin. That's God's wrath is poured out on Jesus for the elect. The rest of you, you're all going to burn. But the elect will go to heaven. Not long after, that's not satisfying to a former Calvinist named Jacob Arminius, and he says, no. God poured his wrath out for everybody on the cross, but those who accept that receive the benefits of it. And that means if you don't believe that God was pouring his wrath out on Jesus on the cross, then you don't receive the benefits. Now, how many of you have heard of the 4 spiritual laws of Billy Graham? God loves you and as a woman. Oh, you're the luckiest people in the world. If you haven't heard of this, that's good. Then I don't need to deconstruct that. Now let me back up a second. Back up to the 12th century, to around the year 1140. There is going to be a priest or a monk who has it's a rather torrid love affair with a lovely young woman named Eloise, and his name is Peter Abelard. I don't know if you've ever run across that name. But Peter Abelard said, if, in fact, Anselm is right, if God is exacting justice in the cross, then that means justice is the primary attribute of God. And Anselm said that's not the case. God is love. And God is light. And it is God's love that we see displayed in the cross. Now, we all affirm this, don't we? How many of you would agree God's love is displayed in the cross? You can put your hands up. You're deodorant. It's all good. If God's love is displayed in the cross, where do you see it? Where do you see God's love in a bloody execution? Where do you see it?
When he's looking down at the people.
And saying,
forgive them, for they know not what they do.
That's exactly right. This is exactly what Peter Abelard saw. It was love expressed as forgiveness that becomes, for us, a model of how to live with each other. Now, Abelard's theory was picked up on by Protestant liberalism. Calvin's theory was picked up by conservative Protestantism. And as a result, Protestantism has been split for 500 years between Abelard and Anselm. Between Abelard and Calvin. We've been split. Liberals do not believe that God is an ogre, that God has an anger management problem, or that God needs medication. It's the evangelical tradition that comes out of Protestant orthodoxy, which comes out of Calvinism and that very rigid Lutheranism of the 17th century, that is going to be teaching this business that God punished Jesus on the cross instead of us. Anglicans, to my knowledge, have never officially declared on atonement theory, as far as I know. The Nicene Creed has no atonement theory. It simply says Christ died. So how we play this out, what the death of Jesus means, we're not locked into a particular view. Like we are, say, with the virgin birth, which is affirmed in the Creed, or the resurrection of the dead, which is affirmed in the Creed. Atonement theories are what it means that Jesus died. We're not locked into that by our tradition. Our tradition gives us room to think about this and room to challenge some of the crazy things that happen in our culture. In 1978, this whole pattern of thinking that comes from Anselm through Calvin into modern Christianity, or especially, let's just say, modern American Christianity, was radically analyzed in the light of anthropology. And I'll get to this in a second, by a fellow named René Girard. René Girard taught at Stanford the last part of his career. In fact, he just passed November 4th, and his funeral was last weekend in California. He's been hailed as the Darwin or the Einstein of the human sciences. That's how important his work is. And he just, in a way, all he did was one thing. He asked about the word sacrifice. It's a word we throw around a lot. It's in our liturgies. We talk about sacrificing ourselves or these sorts of things, but we don't give much thought to the term sacrifice. But Girard did. And one of the things that Girard did was to ask about the function of sacrifice in relation to religion. And for Girard, all religion is sacrifice. And he can trace this back with the great anthropologists, Levi-Strauss and others, back through the dim mists of human history. When you ask, what is it that makes the human human? If you're like me and you're comfortable with the evolutionary theory, which I am, I don't have to buy that God made a literal man and a literal woman in a garden 6,000 years ago. If you're comfortable with evolutionary theory, or that I should say, if you're comfortable being a rational person, what you're looking at now is, what's the evidence? What is the evidence that humans are religious, check this out, before they're civilized? Normally, anthropologists talk about humans going from the hunter-gatherer to becoming agricultural, domesticating wheat and grains, and then domesticating animals, and then out of that we kind of discover the bigger world and wonder about a thing called God. And then we become religious. That's the normal way anthropology does that science. Girard said it's the other way around. Humans are religious and engage in sacrifice before they're even able to talk, before we form language as a species. It is religion that's going to give rise to culture, language, and everything we know as civilization. And you go, well, how can that be? You want the explanation?
Sure.
All right, good. Just like this. I'm going to use a lot of paper up here today. I hope that's all right.
That's all right. That's what it's for.
You have a group of people, and these people get in arguments. Person A is going to want something that person B has. Now this is before we are linguistic. This is we're transitioning from primates to early hominids. We are talking, could be 1,000,000 years. I mean, it could certainly hundreds of thousands of years ago, but it could be 1,000,000 years or two. We're transitioning out of that. Our brains are growing bigger. Primates imitate each other. If you and I are the big primates, the big gorillas in the group, and you reach for a banana, I will imitate that action. And if I reach for that banana, we got a problem because there's only one banana, don't we? So we're going to fight as apes. But the moment one of us does this, the fight's over. But as our brains are enlarging as a species, as we're evolving primates, our brains are enlarging. You know, when you do paleoanthropology, one of the things they measure are the size of craniums. And they note that part of what makes the human, or the Homo sapiens sapien, is that they have an enlarged brain. Well, if you have an enlarged brain, you've got an enlarged capacity to imitate, don't you? And what happens in the human species is that that mechanism that stops the fight, that is the dominant submission hierarchy, okay, I give up, okay, fight's over, that mechanism degrades. You're going to say, but Michael, this is all speculation. It was until 1996. In 1996 in Parma, Italy, a series of experiments demonstrated that the human brain is made partly or significantly of what are known as mirror neurons or mirror neural networks. That is, in the last 20 years since then, they've continued the experimentation. I could go on for an hour about the science behind this, but they've continued this to show that our brains are copy machines. You know what we should do as human beings? We should just write Xerox across our foreheads. Because this is how we learn to be human. We imitate. Andrew Metzloff, who's a child development psychologist, has been doing videotaped research showing that babies 18 minutes out of the womb will already imitate facial gestures made to them. 18 minutes. Jean Piaget, the great child developmental psychologist, said children learn to imitate and then they learn by imitation. That's been totally overturned. Children don't learn to imitate, they are born with Xerox stamped on their heads. As a species, we are hardwired to imitate. We are imitating around us all the time. That's what we're doing. We're copying. And we are the only species that once our needs are met, food and sex, once our needs are met, we're the only species that doesn't know what it wants. You don't exactly see the sparrow sitting out there wringing its wings in the tree going, I don't know what I want. I don't know what I want. What will make me happy? Gee. And the squirrel, I wish I had his nuts. You don't see that. It's the human that has this thing called desire. We want what others want, and that's how we learn to become human. It also is what creates problems for us, because humans are the species that will fight to the death over what they want, because they believe if they can just get what someone else has, they'll be fulfilled. Folks, if you think I'm wrong about this, you just need to start thinking television advertisements, Madison Avenue. They've got this thing wired down cold. They know how to get you to want what they want you to want. Now, if you have a community where person A wants what person B has, and that creates what we call an imitative conflict, or I'm going to use the Greek term mimetic conflict. And then person B wants what C has, and C wants what D has, and so on and so forth. You're going to end up with a community in crisis. The worship committee wants what the care committee has. They've got a bigger budget. How come the worship committee can't manage to get a bigger budget than the care committee? Why do the deacons have so much money? Who gave them power to make the decisions? Well, who gave the vestra? And we start fighting, and we do this. Family systems do this. And we will implode. We will wipe each other out if we don't find a way to transfer all this hostility somewhere. So early on in our development, we learned as a species to take all of our angst out on somebody. Somebody's to blame. And so, in this case, all one person has to do is point a finger. He's to blame right here. He's the problem in our church. Now, if I make this gesture and you imitate it, what do we have? We have a scapegoat. We have let's just get rid of Bill here. Let's get rid of Bill. I don't know your name, bro, so I'm just using Bill. Let's just get rid of him because he's the problem. Now, what happens now is that we pour our collective hostility and blame Brother Bill for all of our woes, kick him out of the church, and then we all go, now we can be a happy family again because we got rid of the trouble. Now, family systems do this. Anybody in here a psychologist? Or study psychology? No? Okay. So you know that family systems therapy says that people play roles in family systems. One of those roles that gets played in a family system is that of the scapegoat. Okay? And we play this out in churches, and we play this out as nations. We have evolved as the species that blames. That is our primary fault. We are the finger-pointing species. What's the term that's used of the Satan in the Bible? The Satan is the accuser of the brethren and the sisters as well. Right? Now, I don't mean to be offensive, okay? But you have to understand this. When you're driving down the road, and, well, that may not be true of you, but hey, I'm a sinner. So, when I'm driving down the road, and somebody cuts me off, or I've got to slam on my brakes because somebody doesn't know how to drive, my tendency is to say, bless you on your way.
Yeah.
No, my tendency is to use the Italian sign language I learned in New York. Right? It's my tendency. This is not the worst thing you can do. That is. That is the satanic symbol You're to blame. You're the problem. If we can get everybody... Don't you think he's the problem? This is the satanic mechanism. It's what starts everything going wrong for us as a species. It is this approach to becoming human that Girard said helps us understand why it is that we have learned to be human community, to be together, because we have someone that we're not. We are not that. Let me ask you this, and feel free to interact, it's all good. Is it not the case that so much of what it means to be the church is to say, we are not that? We're not the world. We're not acting worldly. I live in Lancaster County, which, just an hour north, full of Mennonites and Amish and things. And there are tons of Mennonite sects and different Amish sects, and every single one of them believes they're the true church because they're not like those people over there. So you got your Amish that wear the little hooks. You've seen those when you go to Lancaster, the ladies wear the hooks. And they look at the Amish women that wear buttons and they go, oh, they're worldly. You come up to my neck of the woods and you got Amish and they have the steel wheels on their carriages. Those things chew up the road. And they look at the Amish that have rubber on their wheels and go, oh, they're worldly. Of course we do this too. The Baptists look at us and go, they drink wine, they're worldly. They smoke cigarettes, they're worldly. They dance.
They do it in the closet.
What's that?
They do it in the closet.
They do it in the closet, that's right. I have the funniest story. Remind me when we're off camera to tell you about in the closet.
This is on film?
I'm taping this for my internet audience because I've got thousands of people anyway, I'm taping this, but not you, just me, I'm the only one on film.
Well, for the record, I'm John.
Okay. John is the problem here in St. John's. So we have learned as a species to become community by being against the other. We've learned to other the other. So we're straight, we're not gay. We're white, we're not black. We're American, we're not Iraqi. Whatever it is. All right, we're Episcopalian, we're not Baptist, Lutheran, Evangelical, right? We learn to other the other. In so doing, we are able to transfer all of our negativity onto this person, and for a season, we're quite happy. Now, I don't know, I use this example because I grew up with this example. My mother's family was large. She had 5 sisters, and I probably had 20 cousins. I've never stopped to count. And the husbands and the wives and the sisters and the cousins, we would all get together at Christmas. And it was a happy gathering, as long as a certain uncle wasn't there, because that uncle drank a bit too much. So nobody wanted my uncle around because he drank too much. So here's the family gathering going, you know what? We're really tired of this uncle spoiling our Christmas. He dominates us. It's just like, that's all we deal with, is this poor drunk, creating problems at our big Christmas party. So next year, we're not going to invite him because we don't want to have to deal with him. So what do next year? They don't invite him. He's told not to come. And then they spend the whole damn day talking about it.
So he's still dominating.
Yeah. He's become the scapegoat. He unites us. He united us as a family at the holidays. We didn't get together to love each other. We got together to have a pissing, moaning session about my uncle. Churches do this. Families do this. Nations do this. Right now, the nations are having a great big moaning session about ISIS. The human family. So, what we're looking at here is the demonization of the victim. That is, we have to blame somebody. But let me ask you this. After we've transferred our hostility onto somebody, we all go, feels better now, right? We got rid of the problem. After World War II, got rid of Hitler, got rid of the SS. How did the world feel? Fine for about 3 minutes. Right? Where do we credit this harmony, this feeling fine? Where do we credit that to? Same victim. It's the victim that we killed that now has restored us or reconciled us, brought us together. So what we do is we first demonize the other. That is, they're to blame for all of our woes. And then as a result of this resulting harmony and peace and cohesion that we have as a community, we divinize them. And this is where our gods come from. All human gods have their origins in real human victims. We've learned to divinize our victims. Now, by divinize, I don't necessarily mean turn them into gods. But I do mean to turn them into that which is completely and totally other than human. I'm going to be a little bold here. And some of you, well, I'll just be bold because, see, I get to leave after this.
You know where you live?
That's right. Good. Do come and visit. Well, Dan certainly knows where I live. So far I haven't talked about the guilt or innocence of victims. I've just simply pointed out that we use them, right? In order to divinize a victim, you have to be able to say the benefits also came from that victim. This is how we've operated as a species. I'm going to make a leap here as though the gospel, let me just jump. 1945, Adolf Hitler commits suicide allegedly in a Berlin bunker. We bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki. War's over. Love D-Day, love V-Day. We feel good. We celebrate. Sailors kiss unknown ladies on the streets and we take pictures. Everybody's happy. Woo, the war is over. First thing we do is we demonize Hitler. He was the problem. He was a sadist. He was anti-Semitic. He was this. He was that. And then he's dead. And we go, oh, we have peace at last. We got rid of the other. This peace that we have comes from the demonization of Hitler. And in order for me to accomplish this next step, it's important for you to understand that we have now divinized Hitler. We've turned Hitler into a god. How have we done that? We've done that by saying that nobody can ever be compared to Hitler. Hitler's in a category by himself. Hitler is like one of the three figures at the bottom of Dante's Inferno. There is no similarity between Hitler and this one and Hitler and that one and Hitler. You see what I'm saying? We've made him sui generis. He's of his own kind. When we other the other, when we act as though it's all about the other, rather than recognizing it's about the system, the human system that's the problem, we fail to recognize what's happening in this business of sacrifice. And so we've learned to ritualize this process as a species, and we would cannibalize our victims. You know that the human species is just barely out of the stage of cannibalism as a species? Just barely. Maybe 1,000 years. In a million-year history, that isn't much. Genetically, on the level of DNA, they are able to show that we have a whole history of cannibalism as a species. I have a whole series I do on the Eucharist as a cannibalistic act. I know, but think about this. What are we doing? Well, I won't even go to the Eucharist. I'll leave that for another time if I ever get to that.
Thank you.
No, but it isn't. But it really isn't if you, there's two contexts for the Eucharist. It's the Passover, which reframes this whole cannibalistic activity. But what's really intriguing now is that the Gospel of John in particular is going to reorient the Eucharist to that cannibalism. Unless you munch trogain on my flesh and drink my blood, you can have no part of me. It's that language of cannibalism that comes back into John 6. Because the fact is, the Eucharist is about an innocent figure that the mob kills. And in the Eucharist, when we break the bread, it's as though we're killing Jesus, but unlike other meals, this one has a cup attached to it that says, "And I forgive you," says God. I forgive you. That is, God enters into our mechanism, and this is the only way that God can break us free from religion, is to come into the mechanism right at the heart of it. God could join this side of the mechanism here, the mob, and say, "You're right. The Amalekites are to blame. The Gibeonites are to blame. This one's to blame. Achan is to blame. Yada yada. Saul the king is to blame." God could have done that, and there are texts in the Bible that seem to indicate that that's the position God took. But that's because those texts are breaking free from religious mythology and sacrifice. They're not there yet. By the time you get to Jesus, what you have is this singular revelation. God chooses not to play a part in the role of the accusing mob. God chooses to become the accused. You with me on this? Is it mud? Okay, all right. So I need to switch my thing over here. 1 second. Okay. Don't cooperate with me. It's all right. I don't need you anyway. I scapegoat you. Dan, let's take a break. Go
Okay,
ahead and
So I just close this
no, you press that record button.
again?